and welcome back to Pictorial on Relay FM. I'm Quinn Rose, and I didn't go to art school, but I still love to learn about different artists.
And I'm Betty. I also didn't go to art school, but I also like learning about different artists all the time.
I want to start this episode by asking you, Betty, do you know anything about Ruth Adler Schnee?
I do not, and I don't know if I've even heard of this person. So I am completely ignorant today.
Well, that is very fun and exciting. I want to follow this up with a little follow-up question. I'm going to send you a picture in our show notes, and I want you to tell me what this picture evokes for you.
Oh, okay. So I see a bunch of fabric samples, or what I believe to be fabric samples. They're like folded and swatches that are fanned across. There's, I want to say, like stripy orange and yellow looking one on the left. There's one next to it that's like circles and semicircles and oval-ish patterns in purple, blue, and tan. There's another stripy yellow-ish fabric sample, and then next to it is similar to that circle and oval pattern, except instead of purple and blue, it's like yellow. So yeah, and then I guess what it evokes for me is work, because I used to do a lot of like restaurant and coffee shop designs, and we did a lot of like custom millwork and upholstery, like chairs and like seating designs. So with that, we sometimes have to pick like fabrics. So I used to have these like piles and piles of fabric samples that look almost exactly like these, that I would go through and choose or take out some options to show the client. It's actually quite fun. It's a part of the work that I do enjoy, but it was still work. So
that is so funny, because Ruth Adler Schnee is probably one of the big reasons why these were the kind of fabrics that you were looking at for doing those design jobs.
Oh, well, I guess thank you. And also, probably at the time I was just like, this looks nice.
Yeah. So I am talking about Schnee today because she actually passed away in January of this year, which is sad, but she was 99 years old. So she lived a very long life.
Almost got to 100.
Yeah. She was born on May 13th, 1923, and she was born in Frankfurt, Germany. Now, I believe most people listening probably just had a little alarm bell go off from hearing that, and you're correct. But so Schnee, born Ruth Adler, was born into sort of like a high culture German Jewish family. And so her mom was an artist. She had like Bauhaus training and like really artsy circle of friends. But obviously like pretty early in Ruth's life, things started to go very poorly. In 1937, she was 14 years old, and she actually went to the Degenerate Art Exhibition, which was an exhibit that was designed by the Nazis to be like, this art is horrible and bad, but she was like, this stuff rules. Kandinsky, love it.
I can kind of see that if you're saying these samples that you're showing me is something that she either influenced or created, then I can see some Kandinsky in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Not long after that point, in 1938, very sadly, her father was actually taken to the first concentration camp, but very, very luckily and rarely was actually released a few months later. So he was not in great condition, but he was able to return home. And luckily, since the Adlers were like relatively well connected, they were sponsored by a family in New York City, and they had a job promised to her father in Detroit, and so they were able to leave Germany like quite soon afterwards. Once they got to Detroit, unfortunately, that job that was promised to them did not pan out, and so the entire family went to work in various jobs. Ruth, who was like 15, 16 at this time, worked at a bakery to help support her family while everyone was chipping in. And then she ended up graduating from high school in 1942, and then really embarked on an artistic career from there. I mean, like I said, like she had art influence in her life from a very early age and knew pretty much right away, like, this is what I'm interested in. I am interested in art and design, and I'm going to go do art and design. In 1944, she studied under Walter Gropius at Harvard, and then where she was there on a fellowship from the Harvard Graduate School of Architecture and Design. And then in 1945, she got her Bachelor's of Fine Arts from the Rhode Island School of Design. And then after that point, she interned in New York, and she got a Master's of Fine Arts from the Cranbrook Academy of Art in 1946, where she was one of the first ever women to graduate from this school. So in just the course of a couple years, she just like went from fellowship to internship to degree. And 4 years after graduating from high school, she had a bachelor's and a master's degree in fine art.
Wow. Okay. Well, really puts me to shame. It's been a billion years since I graduated high school, and I'm currently working on my master's degree. But anyway.
I know. She's so well accomplished.
So.
And it was at Cranbrook where she first became interested in textile design, which was what would set the stage for her lifelong career. And then she made a decision that really helped her step up her career, which is she entered into a power couple. So she married Edward Schnee in 1948, who was a Yale graduate in economics. And then so they kind of joined forces with her doing the art and design and him doing the business side, and opened the Adler Schnee home store in Detroit.
Nice.
Yeah, I read a lot of stuff about this home store that was so funny to me, because basically, like, these were two people who were very cosmopolitan, international, like high culture people in like the 40s at a time when it was not that easy to be high culture international, because, you know, like connectivity was not there. And also we're like, this is like just post World War II at this point. We're like we're like late 40s, entering into the 50s when they're doing this store. And they had hibachi barbecues, grills from Japan. Wow. They had like finished table settings. And they were really trying to get people to understand these new kind of home objects, like in a world before like HGTV, and now there's a million ways to like develop home trends and follow up with the trends and like learn about the latest thing out of like whatever random country that's like the thing that people are doing and the thing that people have to have for their house. They're like, we're going to get all this stuff and we're going to sell it to people, and we're going to hold all these workshops to try to explain to people how these things work. They were making brochures about lighting. Like they were just out here really changing the game from this home store in Detroit.
Wow. I'm starting to hope that my design school teachers aren't like screaming right now, because I'm hoping, I'm like, I it's very possible I learned about this person in design school but wasn't paying attention, and they're like, she is one of the most important people that we taught you and you have never even heard of her. Or you know, they actually glossed over her because, you know, in school I learned a lot about men, but so that's also possible. But I was just gonna say, like, it sounds like she's one of the people that like introduced like mid-century modern to like our society, is what it sounds like.
Yes. So this is the big thing that I'm building to is Ruth Schnee and her husband really were some of the driving forces, especially in like Michigan and the Midwest. But really, like, they had one of the first stores in the country that was really doing mid-century modern the way that we, like, when we look at it, when we look at those patterns and those types of furniture and everything, like they were on the cutting edge of that when it was just modern.
Right.
Ruth's real like home was in textile design. So she would design all of these prints, and her husband Edward would like print them on silk screen, and they would be part of the store that they were making. And also Edward named all of the textiles apparently, and they were called like slits and slats and pins and needles and seedy weeds. They all had cute little names.
Oh, that's adorable.
I do really love that. Yes, but so she would develop all these things, and it's a lot of this information that I'm getting is from her New York Times obituary that was published in January. And they said that she found inspiration in both the natural and built worlds. Her garden, the lit windows of skyscrapers, railroad yards, and construction sites all made their way into her designs. She dressed as boldly as her designs, favoring rich colors like red, fuchsia, and orange. And I just like have such a rich image of this person, even from that description.
Yeah, totally. I'm looking at just some pictures of her designs, and I'm like, I feel like I've used some of this probably, or like a variation of some of these patterns. Like, again, like the first ones you showed me, I'm like, I think that's on a chair in a coffee shop in Toronto somewhere that I picked out. So
yeah, it's one of those things where it's hard to say, like, you know, when something becomes so popular that it becomes cliche, or just sort of even not even cliche, but just like the standard of the thing, that you never even think about individuals contributing to the design of it. And because when I see patterns like this, I'm like, oh yeah, that's like what the world looked like in the 50s and 60s. But yeah. No, like there were people that were in the that were part of the development of those patterns, and so she is one of those people.
Well, thank you, Ruth, for your help in my work.
Honestly, yeah, her legacy lives on in coffee shops everywhere Betty goes.
Yeah, exactly.
So not only was she designing fabrics and textiles within her own store, she was commissioned by a lot of other places to sort of contribute design to as well. She contributed drapery on the Ford Rotunda in 1952. We are in Detroit, so, you know, lots of automobile stuff. Mm-hmm. Speaking of which, her work was included in the General Motors Technical Center. Her work was also in the World Trade Center. She, in this era of like the 50s, 60s, was really sort of establishing her style and really thoroughly like having... I hate to call it a brand identity, but to sort of cheapen it, a brand identity, and really just continued making work really until the end of her life. In 2011, she had a solo exhibition at the Venice Biennale. She exhibited in the Smithsonian in 2012. She was just still out here doing work and exhibiting. And then in like 2013, she signed a 20-year contract with Knoll for like the selling of her original work. And she was like, I'm 88 years old. And they were like, it doesn't matter. Yeah. So that's just the kind of person that she was, where there just was so much faith in her work and the enduring legacy of her work, even until like, again, her last decade of life in her 90s, when I intend to either be dead or just feeding the birds. She was still out here designing textiles.
I was just talking to someone about this recently, and this is like, I guess you can either look at this in a positive or a negative way, but a lot of like designers, like, you know, interior designers and architectural designers work until they're like dead. Because whenever recently, whenever I hear about like, you know, architects who like pass away, or like interior designers who are retiring, slash that they retire and then they pass away very soon, they're usually like 90 or like 95 or like 100. But in a way, I can kind of understand, because like, and again, I feel very lucky that I really do enjoy my work, and it's probably one of those things where, like, as I approach retirement age, like right now I'm thinking, oh, I would love to retire. I just, you know, working is so hard. But there might be a point, or there likely is a point for a lot of designers where you're just like, I love this. Like, I don't want to stop doing this. Like, this is great. So I'm hoping that's the reason that these people are working so much, not because they have to, but
yeah,
you know?
It could really go either way with artists sometimes.
Yeah. So
honestly, she just seems like she was probably a very interesting person who lived a very interesting life. And I now have added another link into the show notes that has a whole kind of retrospective of representative designs that she did from the Henry Ford Foundation, henryford.org. Because as I mentioned, like the Henry Ford Museum, sorry. Which makes sense because, again, she was Michigan-based and did work with Ford. And so they have this whole digital collection of sets of her work. And so I have a couple that I wanted to sort of briefly maybe dive into and talk about. I want to give you a chance to give you a minute first to look at everything and see if there's anything that also catches your eye immediately.
I'm not sure which ones were out of the ones that you chose to do a deeper dive into, but I do want to talk a little bit about what I know now is called fish and chips, which is the circles and ovals and half semicircles that I saw earlier that you showed.
Oh my God, you said fish and chips. I heard fish and chips, and I was like, I'm not seeing that one.
Yeah, after I said it, I heard it, and I'm like, I mean, I meant fission, like nuclear, not fish and. I
assume that's the joke. Like, I think that's probably the bit of it, but it got me.
Maybe, yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I like all of these are just so interesting. And they, again, they seem, I'm looking at all of them I'm like, I have seen these before.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing that caught my eye too is like seedy weeds, like, I just feel like, again, I've seen that before. And I feel like these are either they're like these really simple organic shapes, or a lot of these look very industrial, like almost kind of fitting for car manufacturing, I want to say.
Yeah, absolutely. You actually just pulled attention to one of the ones that I liked the most, which is seedy weeds.
Yeah.
And so this is a 1953 design. And this, I think, is one of the most naturalistic of all of her designs. Because, like you said, like a lot of them do have natural shapes. But this one, it, like, has all these little mushrooms. And it's yellows and oranges, which are like, there's a lot of those colors in nature. There's tiny little suns, and then there's all these like signs that they kind of like flowers growing out of the bottom, but they're angular, so they look like tiny little billboard flowers.
Oh, yeah, that's true. And I think it's interesting because if you like, I scroll down a little bit and I see a blue and purple version of seedy weeds, which it is like literally the same patterns, the flower patterns, but in a cool color, and so it looks like snowflakes, or it looks like snowflakes and little like tiny ice like crystals or something, and it works both in a like natural flower field look as well as a like wintry snowflake atmosphere by just changing the color scheme.
Yeah, it looks like this one was inspired by her own personal garden, and it looks like the same garden in the fall versus the winter. And then in contrast to that, I also want to talk about Central Park South, which was designed in the same year, 1953. And this, I think, is one of the pinnacles of the more angular designs that she does, while having the same really similar color scheme, which is like oranges on, or really, I think it's all just one shade of orange on top of an off-white. And all of it is just these tiny little squares that it kind of looks like, when you play Battleship, and so you're putting your little pegs down. And so some of them have like 3 or 4 in a row, and some of them are just 1, and then there's like 2s. So it has that vibe. And then there's also like little X's that are in the same way. Like sometimes there's just 1 X, or there's like a whole little line of X's. But it's all symmetrical on the vertical axis.
The X's are the battleships that have been destroyed and like sunk. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
You know what this reminds me of? And I'm not sure if you're going to mention it. It reminds me of Broadway Boogie Woogie.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, it is Central Park, so it's New York. It's close to Broadway. And I mean, I would be shocked if she didn't know about that painting at the time.
Yes, I feel like there are real similarities between Schnee's sort of more architectural work and Mondrian's work as well. Like, especially even with the title of like the Central Park South, reminds me of like some of the titles of Mondrian paintings as well.
Yeah, and then I think in one of her other designs on that Henry Ford page is construction, which looks like it could be like, you know, wire frames and like structures on a building, but it's got that grid like pattern that looks like an upside down Mondrian painting or right side up. Who knows?
Yeah. And it comes from like a very similar source of inspiration as well, because a lot of Schnee's original training was in architecture. And so I like, even when she moved on to a primary career of textile design, you still have like all of these architecturally inspired elements that evoke like the same ideas and lines as Mondrian's like city street illustrations, interpretive illustrations. And then you pointed out the fish and chips, fish and space,
Fish and
chips.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, which I feel like is such, there's something about this design that is so quintessentially representative of that era of like the 50s, early 60s kind of vibe. This is a 57 design. Because you have, it's just blues and greens, and these sort of vertical lines of pattern of circles, half circles, lines. So they do kind of look, some of them kind of look like fish. I see where they got that.
And the other thing I was wondering is if it's like if there was that direct reference to nuclear fission, because it's circles being split into semicircles. Are they talking about splitting an atom?
Ooh.
And this is the 50s, so it
was very relevant.
Yeah, so I can see that inspiration as well, which, you know, again, that if that was a reference, that didn't age very well, but but the
don't say that, man. It could be aged really well at any moment. You never know.
That's true. Nuclear power. I mean, we don't need to get into that. That's not the topic of this podcast about what energy generation is best for the world. But anyway, yeah. So that could be what it's a part of what it's alluding to. But I will just say, like, I think this particular pattern is one of those things that we were mentioning earlier that is so like timeless and even like at this point ubiquitous. Like I would have just looked at that and be like, yeah, that's just the textile pattern. That's just like a standard like textile pattern you can pick for a chair, or maybe it comes with the chair. I don't know.
Walk into any Bed Bath and Beyond.
Yeah. And that's your shower curtain.
I think it's so funny to talk about designs like this and artists like this, especially in a time when I feel like styles are so cyclical. And right now there's very much like a 70s revival going on. But I feel like there's a general interest in reviving like 2000 styles in different way. It's interesting. There's like a 70s things going on. There's like a Y2K thing going on.
Yeah.
But I also think we're at this point now that people are looking at like different chunks of styles and trying to bring them into contemporary style. And one of those is this idea of mid-century modern. I don't know about anyone else, but I was in an art museum the other day and they had a mid-century modern like furniture display. And I was like, this stuff rules. I want this to be in my house.
Yeah.
Because there's something about something that is so dated that it comes back all the way around to kind of being timeless because it's so of a time, but that time is long enough away that everyone knows you're doing it on purpose.
Yeah, totally. I'm such a sucker for mid-century modern styles. I would totally live in like a Eames house type of situation. Actually, I was just looking at pins and needles, actually. And again, I know Schnee named it pins and needles, but I see a bunch of people. I don't know about you. I see like the little tiny triangles, I think could be heads, and then the inverted triangle could be like shoulder and like leg. I see an abstraction of like a bunch of people, and parts of it also looks like it could be a bunch of people wearing hats, like just standing on a street, and something about that also evokes that time for some reason. I don't know, I don't see, it could be pins and needles, but I see like a crowd of people from this particular fabric design. But again, it's art, and it's probably abstract, and you can probably see whatever you want, but
No, I love that though. I can totally see what you're talking about in these little like triangle people shapes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That could be a crowd, yeah. I actually think that note about the possibilities of different art interpretation, even in something that is seemingly so straightforward as, like consumer textile design, is a really good place to end this episode. So thanks so much for learning a little bit about Ruth Adler Schnee with me.
No problem. Thank you for teaching me something that I either didn't pay attention to in school or they just glossed over in school because she wasn't one of these dudes.
Wow. Really makes you think.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks everybody out there for listening. You can find our show notes and links to everything we talked about today at relay.fm/pictorial. You can also find us on Twitter or Instagram at Pictorial Pod, and you can find me on Instagram at Quinsta Rose.
And you can also find me on Twitter and Instagram at ArticulationsV, and I'm also on YouTube as Articulations. And speaking of YouTube, you can also find our channel on YouTube as Pictorial Podcasts, where we upload some of our older episodes into video format. And for this one, I think it will be very enjoyable for you to look at some beautiful patterns.
Thanks for listening, art enthusiasts.